Take a slow breath in and let it go. There is nowhere you need to be right now. Nothing you need to do. Just settle into wherever you are. Let your body feel heavy. Let your shoulders drop. Let your eyes close gently. Tonight, we are going to follow a quiet story. A life lived with grace and precision. A man who moved through football like a painter moves through a canvas. Unhurried, deliberate, beautiful. His name is Dennis Bergkamp, and we begin where he began. Amsterdam. If you have ever been to Amsterdam in the early morning, you know the kind of stillness that settles over the canals. The water is smooth. The old buildings reflect in long, wavering lines. Bicycles rest against iron railings. The streets are quiet, and the city breathes slowly. It is the kind of city that shapes people in ways they cannot fully explain. A city of detail, of craftsmanship, of patience. Dennis Nicholas Maria Bergkamp was born on May 10, 1969. He grew up in the Westerpark district, in the west of the city. It was a working neighborhood, ordinary streets, ordinary houses. Children played outside in the afternoons. His father, Wim, worked hard. His mother, Tunny, kept the home. They were a football family in the way that most Dutch families were in those years. Football was on the television. Football was in the park. Football was the language children spoke with their feet. Dennis had brothers. He was not the loudest of them. Even then, he was quieter than you might expect. Thoughtful. He watched things carefully before he tried them. He was named after Dennis Law, the Scottish forward who had become one of Britain's most admired players of his era. His father admired Dennis Law. He appreciated the elegance of that kind of player, the way they could control a situation with very little visible effort. There is something poetic in that Dennis Bergkamp would carry a name given in admiration of elegance, and then spend his life embodying it more fully than perhaps anyone imagined. He started kicking a ball very young, against walls, in the street, in the park near his home. The Dutch boys of his generation grew up in an era when Johan Cruyff was still defining what Dutch football meant. Total football was not just a tactic. It was a philosophy, the idea that a player should be able to play anywhere, that positioning was fluid, that intelligence mattered as much as pace or power, that the game was, at its core, a thinking game. Dennis absorbed all of this without quite knowing he was absorbing it. Take another breath. Let your body settle a little more. When Dennis was around 11 years old, he was spotted by Ajax. Ajax, the club of Amsterdam, the club that had, by that point, already become one of the most famous football academies in the world. The system they had built, De Toekomst, the future, was not just about teaching boys to kick a ball. It was about teaching them to see the game, to understand space, to move with purpose. Dennis joined the Ajax youth system, and for the next several years, his life had a quiet rhythm to it. School in the morning, training in the afternoon, evenings at home. The city around him moved at its own pace, and he moved with it. In the academy, the coaches noticed something early. Dennis had what the Dutch call inzicht. Inside, he could see things happening before they happened. He would position himself in a space, and then the ball would arrive, as if by coincidence, though it was never coincidence. It was calculation so smooth it looked effortless. He was not the biggest boy. He was not the fastest, but he had technique that the coaches rarely saw. His first touch was extraordinary. Even as a young teenager, when the ball arrived at his feet, it seemed to stop, to pause, right where he wanted it, as if the ball had agreed to cooperate. He worked on this constantly. After training sessions, when other boys had gone home, Dennis would stay. He would practice receiving the ball from different angles, different heights, different speeds. He was not obsessive in a frantic way. He was methodical, patient. He believed that if you practice something enough, it became natural. And if it was natural, it was free. The Ajax Academy in those years was producing technically refined, intelligent players who understood the game deeply. The coaches moved boys through the system carefully, watching for not just technical ability, but temperament. Could a boy stay calm when things went wrong? Could he think when the game was fast? Dennis passed every test. He progressed through the youth levels, under 14, under 16, under 18. Each year, a little more responsibility, a little more expectation. And with each year, he seemed more at ease, not less. There is something calming about the image of those years. The Ajax training ground, boys in orange and white, the autumn light falling over the practice pitches, the sound of boots on grass, the coaches calling out quietly, and Dennis among them, already becoming something rare. His debut for Ajax's first team came in 1986. He was 17 years old. The match was against Roda JC in the Dutch Eredivisie, the league he had watched on television as a small boy, the stage where Johan Cruyff had once moved like a ghost. He came on as a substitute. He did not score, but he was calm. He moved without panic. He touched the ball as if he had been playing there for years. Johan Cruyff was managing Ajax at that time. Cruyff was not an easy man to impress. He had seen everything football had to offer. He had defined a generation. But when he watched Dennis play, something caught his attention. The touch, the movement, the intelligence. Cruyff said very little publicly. He rarely praised young players in ways that might inflate their sense of arrival. But those who were close to him knew he had noticed. Over the next few seasons, Dennis established himself in the Ajax squad. He was not yet a starter in every match. He learned from experienced players. He watched. He asked questions. He practiced. And slowly, the opportunities came more often, and he took them. By the late 1980s, he was becoming a regular. Ajax were not the dominant force in Europe that they would later become again, but they were always respectable, always dangerous. And Dennis was becoming their most interesting young forward. He had a quality that was hard to name precisely. When he received the ball, time seemed to slow slightly, not because the game actually slowed, but because he processed information so quickly that he always seemed to have a moment more than everyone else. He would take the ball under pressure, hold it for a fraction of a second longer than seemed wise, and then release it. A pass, a turn, a shot, at exactly the right moment. Dutch journalists began to write about him. The descriptions were always calm, precise. They reached for words like elegant and clinical and intelligent. He was not described the way a powerful striker might be described. He was described the way you might describe a craftsman, someone who made complicated things look simple. Let your breath be easy. There is nothing to hold on to right now. In 1990, Dennis Bergkamp traveled with the Netherlands national team to the World Cup in Italy. Italia, 90. If you remember those images, and even if you don't, they have a particular quality to them. Italy in the summer of 1990 was beautiful in a way that football tournaments sometimes are. The stadiums were full. The evenings were warm. The football was often cautious, sometimes brilliant, occasionally transcendent. The Netherlands were defending champions of Europe. They had won the 1988 European Championship in West Germany, a tournament remembered for the Dutch playing some of the most flowing, confident football the continent had seen in years. Ruud Gullit, Frank Rijkaard, Marco van Basten, and behind them, or around them, younger players like Dennis, watching, preparing, waiting. He was 21 years old at that World Cup. He was already in the squad, already considered important. But the weight of expectation on the Netherlands was enormous. They had the players. They had the philosophy. The world expected them to win. They did not win. They were eliminated in the second round by West Germany in a match that was complicated and frustrating, and that left the Dutch deeply disappointed. But for Dennis, the tournament was a step. He had been there. He had played. He had touched the stage and felt its size. Back in Amsterdam, back at Ajax, the work continued. The early 1990s were a period of quiet accumulation for him. Season by season, he became more central to Ajax. His goals came with increasing frequency, and they came in ways that people remembered. Not always powerful shots from distance. Often, more intricate things. A first touch that killed the ball and created a yard of space. A turn that left a defender standing. A finish that was placed rather than struck, arriving at the corner of the net with the certainty of something inevitable. He won the Dutch League with Ajax. He won the Dutch Cup. He represented his country in qualifying campaigns, in tournaments, in the slow geography of international football that takes players from city to city across a continent. In 1992, Ajax reached the UEFA Cup final. It was a two-legged affair against Torino. Dennis played. Ajax won on away goals. A European trophy. His first. By now, he was 23. He had been a professional footballer for 6 years. He had won domestic honors. He had won in Europe. He had played for his country at a World Cup, and he was just beginning. Ajax sold Dennis Bergkamp to Internazionale in the summer of 1993. The fee was significant, £12 million, which at that time was a substantial sum, a statement from Inter that they believed they were buying something exceptional. Inter Milan, one of the great clubs of Europe. The stadium, the San Siro, shared with AC Milan, was a cathedral of Italian football. The city of Milan was different from Amsterdam in almost every way. The fashion, the food, the pace, the heat in summer, the fog in winter, the politics of Italian football, which were ancient and intricate and not always visible to those arriving from outside. Dennis moved with his wife, Henrietta. They had been together since they were young. She was steady and warm and understood him in ways that mattered. They settled into the city as best they could. But the football was difficult. Italian football in the early 1990s was the most defensively sophisticated football in the world. The marking was tight. The spaces were smaller. The game was slower in some ways, faster in others. The defenders were experienced and technical and not inclined to give forward players any comfort. Dennis struggled to adapt in his first season. This is not unusual. Many brilliant players have found Italian football difficult at first, but it was uncomfortable. A player who had always felt free, who had always had a relationship of trust with the game, now found himself constrained, questioned, criticized. The Italian press could be harsh. When things went wrong, the analysis was public and unsparing. Dennis scored some goals. He was never invisible, but he did not reach the heights that had been expected when he arrived. The 3 years he spent at Inter were a complicated chapter, not a failure, but not a fulfillment. He worked, he tried, he learned from the difficulty. He became more resilient in ways that would matter later. There were individual moments of brilliance, a goal against Lazio that caught the eye, a performance in Europe that reminded observers why Ajax had valued him so highly. But the consistent, flowing form he had shown in Amsterdam was elusive. By 1995, it was time to move. Let yourself breathe slowly. Let the weight of the day release a little more. Arsenal came to him through a conversation between managers. Bruce Rioch had just been appointed as Arsenal's new manager in the summer of 1995. Arsenal were a club in transition. They had been one of England's most successful clubs in the late 1980s and early 1990s. League champions, cup winners, a club with a history of stability and achievement. But they needed renewal. They needed a player who would signal that the club was moving in a new direction. Dennis Bergkamp arrived at Arsenal in June 1995 for £7.5 million. London. If Amsterdam was a city of canals and quiet mornings, London was something else entirely. Enormous, loud in places, full of a particular kind of energy that is both exhausting and exhilarating. The tube, the double-decker buses, the parks that appear suddenly in the middle of everything, the gray mornings and the occasional afternoon when the light turns golden over the rooftops. Dennis settled in North London. He found the city manageable, even enjoyable. The English game was different from what he had experienced in Italy. It was faster, more physical. The spaces appeared and disappeared quickly. The defenders were strong and direct. But Dennis adapted more quickly here than he had in Italy, perhaps because he was older, 26 now, and more experienced. Perhaps because the directness of English football suited something in him. Perhaps because the team around him was willing to accommodate his intelligence, to move in ways that created space for him to operate. His first season was encouraging, but not yet the full Dennis Bergkamp. He found his feet. He scored goals. He showed the English crowd things they had not quite seen before. The touch, the vision, the timing of his movement. But there were still moments of adjustment. Then, in the summer of 1996, Arsene Wenger arrived. Arsene Wenger, a Frenchman from Alsace, a manager who had spent years in France and then in Japan, developing ideas about football that were, at the time, considered unusual in England. Diet, recovery, training methods. The idea that players should be looked after physically as a priority, not just worked hard. The idea that technique and intelligence could be cultivated, even in players who had already been playing professional football for years. Wenger looked at Dennis Bergkamp and saw exactly the kind of player his system was built around. A thinker, a technician, someone who did not need to be told what to do in every situation, who had, instead, internalized the game deeply enough to make the right choice by instinct. The relationship between Wenger and Bergkamp was one of quiet mutual understanding. They did not need to talk very much to communicate. Wenger trusted Dennis to interpret the game. Dennis trusted Wenger to give him the freedom to do so. And in that environment, something opened up. Highbury. It is worth pausing here for a moment, because Highbury was unlike most football stadiums. It was old, built in 1913, and expanded over the decades. It sat in the middle of a residential neighborhood in Islington, North London. The streets around it were lined with Victorian terraces. On match days, the houses absorbed the noise of arriving fans and then released it, concentrated, into the bowl of the stadium itself. The East Stand, built in the 1930s, had an Art Deco facade, marble floors in the entrance hall, high ceilings. It had the look and feel of something that had been built to last. Not just a sporting venue, but a statement of permanence and pride. The pitch was good, well maintained. In the autumn, the light fell across it in long diagonals. In the winter, the floodlights created a particular intensity. The green of the grass against the dark, the white of the shirts, the red of the Arsenal home kit like a flag unfurled. This is where Dennis Bergkamp did some of the best work of his life. He played on that pitch for 11 seasons, more than 400 appearances, and the crowd there came to know him in the way that a crowd can come to know a particular player, not just as someone who scored goals and made passes, but as a presence, a quality in the air, something that made watching football feel like something more. The 1997-98 season, Arsenal won the double that year, the Premier League title and the FA Cup. It was their first league title since 1991. The city felt it. North London, which had been waiting for something like this, received it with a warmth that was almost surprised by its own depth. Dennis was central to everything that season. Not always in the statistics. Ian Wright scored the goals. Patrick Vieira controlled the midfield. Tony Adams and the back four were resolute. But Dennis was the connective tissue, the player around whom the attacking movements organized themselves. He scored 17 goals in all competitions that season, but the number alone does not describe it. There were games where he touched the ball 30 times and seemed to be involved in every moment that mattered. A ball played through a gap that no one else had seen. A touch that controlled a difficult pass and created an instant of calm in a chaotic penalty area. A movement that dragged a defender out of position and created space for a teammate. He was named the PFA Players' Player of the Year that season, voted for by his fellow professionals, the people who knew most clearly what was difficult and what was rare. Take a slow breath. Let your mind rest on that image. The green of Highbury, the autumn light, Dennis moving into space with that unhurried certainty. There were goals that people still describe carefully. Years later, the goal against Leicester City in August 1997 is one of them. The ball arrived to Dennis from a long pass forward. It came over his right shoulder, dropping at speed. He was facing away from goal, with a defender close behind him. What happened in the next 2 seconds was, there is no better word for it, art. He controlled the ball with his right foot, killing its momentum instantly. In the same movement, he turned, not a full turn, more of a pivot, and as the ball dropped, he struck it with his right foot on the volley. The ball flew into the far corner of the net. The goalkeeper had not moved. The defender had not moved. They were still processing what had happened when the ball was already in the net. It was the kind of goal that is difficult to explain in words, because words are sequential, and what Dennis did was simultaneous. The control and the turn and the finish were one motion, one thought, expressed through a body that had practiced this so many times it no longer needed to think about the individual parts. The crowd at Highbury was quiet for half a second after it went in. Then it was not quiet at all. There was a goal against Newcastle United in March 2002. A different kind. Dennis received the ball deep, with his back to goal. 2 defenders around him. He held the ball with a strength that was subtle, not a shoulder barge, not a physical confrontation, just balance and timing, and an awareness of where everyone was. He turned. He moved into the box, and then he lifted the ball over the goalkeeper with the outside of his right boot. Delicate, almost casual. These goals were not accidents. They were the result of 10,000 hours of practice, arriving at the moment they were needed. But the goals were not even the most remarkable thing about him. The most remarkable thing was the rhythm of the ordinary. A match where nothing spectacular happened, and yet Dennis had touched the ball 40 times, and every touch had been correct. Every decision had been the right one. The team had moved better because he was on the pitch. The game had been cleaner, more purposeful. That is a harder thing to see than a spectacular goal. But those who watched Arsenal in those years remember it. The 1998 World Cup in France. Dennis played for the Netherlands in one of the most memorable tournaments of the late 20th century. France in the summer of 1998. The warmth of Paris, the long evenings, the stadiums full of colors and noise. The Netherlands had a strong squad. Patrick Kluivert up front, Clarence Seedorf in midfield, Frank de Boer at the back, and Dennis orchestrating the attack with that calm, unhurried intelligence. They reached the semi-finals. The quarter-final against Argentina is remembered for a goal that is described, even now, as one of the greatest in World Cup history. The Netherlands were drawing 1-1 in the final minutes. Frank de Boer played a long ball forward, a long, arcing pass from inside his own half. Dennis was running. He had timed his run so precisely that he arrived at the ball at exactly the right moment. The ball came over his right shoulder, and he did not slow down, did not stop to control it. He let it fall to his right foot, and in one motion, with the defender alongside him, he touched it forward, then past the goalkeeper and into the net. 3 touches. The most important 3 touches in a football match, timed with the precision of something that had been rehearsed. Though it had not been rehearsed, it could not have been. It was improvisation that looked like choreography. The Netherlands went on to lose the semi-final to Brazil on penalties. It was a loss that sat heavily, so close to the final, so close to something that the Dutch football community had been wanting for years. But that goal against Argentina, that moment, was already somewhere beyond the result. It was already in another category, the category of things that football produces, rarely and without announcement, that belong to something larger than the game itself. Let your breathing be easy. Let the images come and go without holding on to them. There is something else that should be mentioned, because it is part of who Dennis Bergkamp was. He did not fly. From the mid-1990s onward, Dennis Bergkamp did not board airplanes. The reasons were his own, and he spoke about them carefully in later years. A growing anxiety about flying that arrived without clear warning and then stayed. He did not dramatize it. He simply did not fly. This meant that for away matches in European competition, he traveled by car or train. Long journeys across Europe, the Channel Tunnel, the roads of France and Germany and Italy. He would arrive at training, at matches, having traveled through the night or across long stretches of motorway while his teammates had flown. It also meant that he missed some matches, European away games to destinations too far to reach by land. He would stay in London and watch from a distance. His teammates would play without him, and he would watch and wait, and then be there again for the next home match or the next manageable journey. The English press called him the non-flying Dutchman. He accepted the phrase with the mild tolerance of someone who had decided not to let labels define him. It was, in a way, consistent with the rest of him. He did not do things because they were expected. He did not override his instincts to meet external requirements. He was, from the beginning to the end, himself, completely and without apology. The years at Arsenal continued. The 2001-2 season brought another double, another Premier League title, another FA Cup. Dennis was 32 years old, and if anything, he was more effective than he had been 5 years earlier, more economical. He knew exactly where to stand, exactly when to move, exactly how much energy to apply to any given situation. A career of learning had produced a player who wasted nothing. Thierry Henry had arrived at Arsenal in 1999, and the relationship between Henry and Bergkamp became one of the most admired attacking partnerships in European football. Henry was pace and power, and an almost supernatural ability to finish. Dennis was intelligence and timing and touch. They understood each other without needing to explain it. Henry would make a run, and Dennis would find him with a pass that arrived exactly where it needed to. Dennis would hold the ball, and Henry would arrive in the space that Dennis had already identified before Henry had decided to run into it. The 2003-04 season, Arsenal went the entire Premier League season unbeaten. 49 league matches across 2 seasons without defeat. It was, and remains, the only time in the modern era that a team went an entire top-flight English league season undefeated. Dennis played 35 times that season. He was 34 years old. He scored 4 goals. He made assists that the statistics recorded, and assists that the statistics could not record. The movement, the positioning, the weight of a pass that set something in motion long before the final action that got credited. They were called the Invincibles. And while the name was applied to the squad as a whole, those who watched that season remember that it had a quality, a particular kind of composed confidence that Dennis embodied more than anyone. After that season, things began to wind down gradually, not dramatically. Dennis did not decline sharply or fall away suddenly. He continued to play. He continued to contribute. But the seasons after the Invincibles were more difficult. Arsenal were building for the future, which sometimes meant the present was complicated. The new stadium, the Emirates, was being planned and would eventually replace Highbury. Financial constraints affected the squad. There were years of transition. Dennis continued through them, quietly, with the same professionalism he had always brought. Less central now, but still present. Still, when he played, doing something that made people pay attention. His last season at Arsenal was 2005-06. Highbury's last season. It felt appropriate, in some way, that Dennis would leave at the same time as the ground where he had done so much of his best work. The final match at Highbury was in May 2006 against Wigan Athletic. Arsenal won 4-2. Henry scored a hat-trick. Dennis played. When the final whistle went, the players walked around the pitch. The crowd said goodbye to Highbury, and to some of the players who were leaving, and to something that had lasted 100 years and was now ending. Dennis walked the perimeter of the pitch. He was 36 years old. He had been a professional footballer for 20 years. He had won domestic league titles in 2 countries, a UEFA Cup, an FA Cup, an Intercontinental Cup. He had played in 4 major international tournaments for the Netherlands. He had been voted, multiple times, among the best players in the world. He did not seem to be performing any emotion in that moment. He just walked, and the crowd responded to the quiet truth of it. He retired from professional football in 2006. No announcement, no farewell tour. He simply stopped playing and moved into the next chapter of his life. He was at home in North London for a while. He spent time with Henrietta, with their children. He had 4, Mitchell, Jasper, Estelle, and Frankie. He had always been a father in the way that people who are serious about things tend to be fathers, present, attentive, not distracted by the external life. He spent time thinking about what he wanted to do next. There were approaches from clubs, from television, from commercial enterprises that wanted to use his name. He was measured about all of it. He did not rush. Breathe in slowly and out. In 2011, he returned to Ajax, not as a player, as a coach. He joined the coaching staff at the club where his career had begun. He worked with young players. He worked within the academy. He brought to the training ground the same precision and patience that had defined his playing career. The belief that technique could always be refined, that understanding the game was a lifetime's work, that the most important qualities in a footballer were not physical, but intellectual. He moved back to Amsterdam with his family, back to the city of canals and early mornings, back to the club that had first seen something in him as an 11-year-old boy. The Ajax that he returned to was, in some ways, the same as the Ajax he had left. The emphasis on technical development, the belief in a particular way of playing, fluid, intelligent, positional, the colors, the crest, the language of the training ground. He was part of the coaching team that supported Frank de Boer, his former international teammate, who had become the first team manager. He worked quietly within the structure. He was not the face of the operation. He did not seek the spotlight. He came to training, worked with the players, traveled with the squad, and went home. He was a respected presence. The players, young men who had watched him play on YouTube, who had grown up hearing his name described alongside the greatest players of the generation, responded to him with a mixture of admiration and genuine engagement. Because he was not distant, he was direct. He showed them things. He explained things in a language they could understand. He did not rely on his reputation to teach. He actually taught. The years at Ajax continued through the 2010s. He moved through different roles within the coaching structure: assistant manager, technical director. The exact boundaries of his role shifted as the club shifted. Ajax had good years and difficult years. There were changes of manager, changes of strategy. There was a remarkable period in 2018 to 19 when Ajax, under the management of Erik ten Hag, reached the semi-finals of the UEFA Champions League. A squad of young, technically gifted players, many of them products of the academy that Dennis had been part of nurturing, played football that reminded observers of the best Ajax teams of the past. Fast, fluent, intelligent. They eliminated Real Madrid. They eliminated Juventus. And they came within a single goal of reaching the final, losing to Tottenham Hotspur in extraordinary circumstances in the second leg of the semi-final. Dennis was part of the infrastructure that had produced those players. Not as the sole architect. There were many coaches, many influences, but as a consistent presence, carrying the values and the vision that he had absorbed at Ajax 40 years earlier. He was, in those years, something that English football writers sometimes struggled to describe. Not a celebrity, not a pundit, not a figurehead in the conventional sense, just someone who worked, quietly and consistently in service of the game he had always loved. In more recent years, Dennis has remained connected to football in various capacities. He has spoken in interviews about the game, about coaching, about the challenges of modern football. He is thoughtful in interviews. He does not offer simple opinions. He considers his words carefully, as he always considered his passes. He has spoken about what he enjoyed most about playing, not the goals, particularly, or the trophies, though those mattered. What he enjoyed most was the feeling, in the middle of a match, when everything was in the right position, when the team was moving correctly, when the space existed and the timing was right, and the ball went where it was meant to go. That feeling of everything being correct simultaneously. That was, he has said, the closest thing to perfection he knew. He has remained in Amsterdam, connected to Ajax, connected to the city. The canals are still there. The old houses still reflect in the water in the early mornings. The bicycles still lean against the railings. The city still breathes slowly. He is in his 50s now, still recognizably himself, still quiet, still precise, still when he watches football, which he does with the same focused attention he always brought to the game, seeing things that others perhaps take longer to see. There is something worth holding on to as we move toward the end of this quiet story. Dennis Bergkamp played football for 20 years at the highest level. He was regarded, by the time he retired, as one of the most technically gifted players in the history of the game. Those who played alongside him, Henry, Vieira, Adams, Overmars, Kluivert, many others, describe him in terms that tend to be both superlative and specific. They don't say simply that he was great. They say things like, he always knew where you were before you knew where you wanted to be. He made you feel like a better player. When Dennis was on the pitch, everything made more sense. That is a rare quality, and it is connected, perhaps, to the kind of person he was off the pitch as well. Someone who paid attention, who respected the people around him, who did not need to be the loudest voice in the room to be the most important presence. He was not without ego. No great player is, entirely. He was competitive. He wanted to win. He was frustrated when things went wrong. But the ego was quiet. It expressed itself through the work, not through performance. He was, in the word that keeps returning, an artist, not in a pretentious sense, not in the sense of being fragile or difficult or above the ordinary requirements of professional sport, but in the sense of someone whose primary motivation was always to do the thing as well as it could be done, to find the right touch, to make the right movement, to see the game clearly and respond to it honestly. That is what art is at its heart, attention and honesty expressed through a medium. His medium was a football pitch, and a ball, and the space between himself and the nearest defender. And now, let the story settle. Let all of it. Amsterdam, Ajax, Italy, London, Highbury, the goals, the season unbeaten, the return home. Let all of it settle into a quietness. The canals of Amsterdam are still tonight. The water is still. The houses on the Prinsengracht stand as they have stood for 400 years. The bridges are empty. A bicycle light moves slowly across a bridge in the distance and then disappears. On the training pitches of Ajax, the goals stand empty in the dark. The grass is damp with dew. In a few hours, the morning light will come across the city from the east, and the day will begin again. Boys will arrive to practice. Coaches will watch. The work will continue, as it always continues. Dennis Bergkamp is in Amsterdam. He is at rest. The game goes on without him now, in the way that all games eventually go on without the people who gave them their most beautiful moments. But those moments are still there, somewhere. They do not disappear. They exist in the way that all beautiful things exist once they have been made, in the memory of those who witnessed them, and in the quality that they added permanently to our understanding of what is possible. A ball arriving over a right shoulder, a touch, a turn, a finish, and the goalkeeper still standing, the net still moving, the crowd still arriving at what they have just witnessed. Let your eyes stay closed. Let your breath come and go without effort. There is nothing more tonight. Just this quiet. Just the image of the canals in the dark, the water smooth, the city sleeping. You can let go of the story now. You can let go of everything. The thoughts that come can pass through without holding you, like clouds over Amsterdam on a still evening, like the way Dennis used to move across the pitch, purposeful, unhurried, arriving exactly where he was needed, and then gone. Rest now. The game is over. The city is quiet, and you can sleep